In this video, we will discuss the antebellum reform movements of the early 19th century. These reforms focused on specific issues such as temperance, prison reform, education, abolition of slavery, and women's rights. The Second Great Awakening was a Protestant religious revival during the early 19th century in the United States. It spread religion through revivals and emotional preaching, and sparked a number of reform movements. Revivals were a key part of the movement and attracted hundreds of converts to new Protestant denominations. The Second Great Awakening led to a period of antebellum social reform and an emphasis on salvation by institutions. The outpouring of religious passion and revival began in Kentucky and Tennessee in the 1790s and early 1800s among the Presbyterians, Methodists, and Baptists. During the period, the American population was rapidly growing and moving westward after territorial expansion. The awakening brought comfort in the face of uncertainty as a result of the socio-political changes in America. The Second Great Awakening was caused by a number of factors, all centered around the effects of early industrialization. The waves of Irish and German immigrants of the first half of the 19th century created xenophobia amongst native-born Americans. There was a perceived cultural threat coming from this wave of immigration. Second, with industrialization came the exploitation of labor and the destruction of the environment. Early labor unions will attempt to address this issue. Next, with industrialization and urbanization came numerous social problems, such as crime, disease, pollution, poverty, vice, and alcoholism. Finally, industrialization brought to light the inequities of capitalism and the development of materialism within the upper and middle classes. It's important to compare and contrast the First and Second Great Awakenings. The Great Awakening of the 18th century was a religious reaction to materialism, lack of spirituality, and declining church membership. It led to a challenging of not only church authority, but the authority of the colonial rulers. It also produced a diversity of thought and eventually led to the American Revolution. The Second Great Awakening of the 19th century was a religious reaction to materialism, capitalism, industrialization, environmentalism, inequity, and alienation of the American people. Like the First Great Awakening, it produced a diversity of thought. But unlike the First Great Awakening, it led to a series of reform movements that pushed the country towards the Civil War. In the North, the Second Great Awakening inspired a great movement for social reform. In the South, it did not produce social activists or reform movements, but rather emphasized personal religious devotion. As a result of Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831, Congress passed a gag rule, prohibiting any discussion about prohibiting slavery. The South became a closed-off society, as the North continued to experiment with reform measures that attacked the changing economy and society. The Great Awakening soon spread rapidly throughout the country, reaching its greatest heights in the western regions. In only a few years, a large proportion of the American people were mobilized by the movement, and membership in those churches embraced the revival, most prominently the Methodists, Baptists, and Presbyterians. A Presbyterian minister named Charles G. Finney started a more radical form of revivalism in upstate New York, where many New Englanders had settled. Instead of delivering sermons based on rational argument, Finney appealed to people's emotions and fear of damnation and persuaded thousands to publicly declare their revived faith. He preached that they were free to be saved through faith and hard work, ideas that strongly appealed to the rising middle class caught in the transition of the market revolution. The Second Great Awakening, like the first, caused new divisions in society. It affected all sections of the country, but it was only in the northern states from Massachusetts westward to Ohio that the Great Awakening played a significant role in social reform. Activist religious groups provided both the leadership and the well-organized voluntary societies that drove the reform movements of the antebellum era. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is a Protestant Christian denomination distinguished by its observance of Saturday, the original seventh day of the Judeo-Christian week, as the Sabbath, and by its emphasis on the imminent second coming or advent of Jesus Christ. The denomination grew out of the Millerite movement in the United States during the middle part of the 19th century and was formally established in 1863. Among its founders was Ellen G. White, whose extensive writings were still held in high regard by the church today. The church is known for its emphasis on diet and health, its holistic understanding of the person, its promotion of religious liberty, and its conservative principles and lifestyle. It currently has a worldwide baptized membership of about 21.4 million people. It has the seventh most followers of all Christian denominations. It has a missionary presence in over 200 countries and territories and is ethnically and culturally diverse. Transcendentalism was an idealistic, philosophical, and social movement which developed in New England around 1836 in reaction to rationalism. Influenced by Romanticism, Plato, and Kant's philosophy, it taught that religion contains all nature and humanity, and its members held progressive views on feminism and communal living. It also questioned the doctrines of established churches and business practices of the merchant class. They challenged the materialism of American society by arguing that artistic expression is more important than the pursuit of wealth. Influential transcendentalists included Ralph Waldo Emerson, who wanted to create a distinct American culture. He was a harsh critic of slavery who argued for self-reliance and independent thinking. Another one was Henry David Thoreau, who lived in a cabin in the woods for 2 years and wrote his famous book, Walden. He also wrote on civil disobedience, an essay that advocated nonviolent protest, and refused to pay taxes in protest of the U.S. war with Mexico. He would later inspire Gandhi and MLK Jr. Next was Nathaniel Hawthorne, who wrote The Scarlet Letter, a novel that included the transcendentalist ideas of civil disobedience, criticisms of Puritan society, self-reliance, and nature as a reflection of God. Finally, there's Louisa Alcott, author of Little Women. She was an abolitionist and feminist who participated in the Underground Railroad. In 1841, George Ripley, a Protestant minister, launched a communal experiment at Brook Farm in Massachusetts. His goal was to achieve a more natural union between intellectual and manual labor. Living at Brook Farm at different times were some of the leading intellectuals of the period. Emerson went, so did Margaret Fuller, a feminist writer and editor, Theodore Parker, a theologian and radical reformer, Nathaniel Hawthorne, the leading novelist. A bad fire and heavy debts forced the end of the experiment in 1849. But Brook Farm was remembered for its atmosphere of artistic creativity and innovative school that attracted the sons and daughters of New England's intellectual elite. New Harmony was a utopian experiment founded by Robert Owen, and his idea that an individual's character was shaped by his or her environment. He believed that by controlling the environment, superior character could be developed, which would result in a new utopian social order. He provided equality for all of his inhabitants. Each citizen was responsible to contribute to the labor force. Currency would be worth the amount of time a worker labored. It could be exchanged for commodities. Since Owen didn't believe in God, there was no central covenant that bound them together. They lacked the commitment to carry out Owen's mission, so it dissolved in less than 3 years. After undergoing a religious conversion, John Humphrey Noyes, in 1848, started a cooperative community in Oneida, New York, that became highly controversial. Dedicated to an ideal of perfect social and economic equality, members shared property and later even shared marriage partners. Critics attacked the Oneida system of planned reproduction and communal child-rearing as a sinful experiment in free love. The community managed to prosper economically by producing and selling silverware of excellent quality. A program of eugenics, then known as stirpiculture, was introduced in 1869. It was a selective breeding program designed to create more perfect children. Communitarians who wished to be parents could go before a committee to be matched based on their spiritual and moral qualities. 53 women and 38 men participated in this program, which necessitated the construction of a new wing of the Oneida Community Mansion House. The experiment yielded 58 children, 9 of whom were fathered by Noyes himself. Of the hundreds of early experiments in communal living in colonial America, the Shakers were the most successful and enduring. The Shakers started in England as a dissident Protestant sect known as Shaking Quakers, for the wild form of dancing they practiced during intense prayer sessions. Under persecution from the English, 8 of the faithful fled to America in 1774, led by Mother Ann Lee. Lee and her band of merry followers settled in New England, but quickly spread, establishing Shaker communities from Maine to Florida and as far west as Ohio and Indiana. Surprisingly, Shakers are celibate, so they can only perpetuate and thrive by recruiting new adult members and by taking in orphans, a practice that was eventually made illegal in the 1960s. Children were not raised as Quakers, but were allowed to choose when they turned 21. Those who chose to leave were first given money, tools, and a trade. That trade was usually furniture making. The Shakers strove to create an environment that was clean, orderly, and free of distractions so they could worship with pure hearts and minds. This meant a blanket rejection of materialism, vanity, and decoration for decoration's sake. This is reflected in their furniture, notable for its lack of adornment. Shaker-style furniture is also seen as innately American in its rejection of anything European or British, and demand among non-Shaker colonists was strong in the aftermath of the Revolutionary War. The Shakers began selling their furniture to the public in 1789 and continued to do so until 1947. Most Shaker-style furniture made today is mass-produced by mainstream furniture makers. New pieces by the rare remaining Shaker artisans sell for many thousands of dollars. Shakers are often mistakenly thought to be Luddites, like the Amish, but nothing could be further from the truth. The Shakers have always embraced technology and welcomed any innovation that saved time, which they believed belongs to God. Their inventions numbered in the hundreds, many of which we still take for granted today, including the flat broom, the circular saw, the common clothespin, and the rotary oven. They were the first to sell packaged seeds, the first to popularize photography, the first adopters of electricity and automobiles. They even invented the automatic washing machine, with powered agitators, which they exhibited at the 1876 World Exhibition in Philadelphia. They became wealthy selling their washing machines to hotels all over the world. Mormonism began in upstate New York as a result of the efforts of Joseph Smith, who published the Book of Mormon. Mormons would repeatedly attempt to establish their new Jerusalem, but would be persecuted by surrounding communities because of their radical beliefs of polygamy, the right to have several wives, a rigid social organization, and intense secrecy. In 1844, Joseph Smith was arrested and charged with treason for allegedly attempting to create a Mormon colony in the Southwest. He was killed when an angry mob attacked the jail. His successor, Brigham Young, led them across the country to present-day Salt Lake City, where they established a permanent settlement.